Good morning, everyone.
Happy Valentine's Day.
That's right. Should we get started or should we wait a couple minutes? I can't see if we have everyone that we need. Rich, you just let me know, okay, when to get started.
Yeah, as far as board members, it looks like we have Dr. Fine, we have you, we have Misty Smith, we have Dr. McKiff. So we do have a quorum.
Okay, well,
Keith is here and we have DHHS staff here as well.
Okay, well, let's jump in.
Well, Dr. Norris just joined.
Good morning, Dr. Norris. And thanks everyone for joining us. So I'm going to just go through the openers. So this meeting is being held virtually, hosted by the Utah Department of Health and Human Services, Center for Medical Cannabis in Salt Lake City, Utah. Public notice of this meeting was provided as required under Utah's open meeting laws, and it was posted on the Utah Public Notice website. In compliance with Utah's open meetings law, this meeting is being recorded. A recording of this meeting will be posted to the Utah Public Notice website no later than 3 business days following the date of this meeting. Written minutes will also be prepared for this meeting. Approved minutes will be posted to the Utah Public Notice website no later than 3 business days after approval. So just a reminder, the purpose of this board is to review the available research and assist the Utah Department of Health and Human Services and Center for the Medical Cannabis in efforts to provide useful treatment recommendations to qualified medical providers regarding the use of cannabis and cannabinoid products for treatment of certain medical conditions identified as qualifying medical conditions. I'm going to assume Rich or Sarah that you're recording who's attending. If that's okay, we have a quorum. Is Dr. Hoffman here?
I did see her, yes.
Oh, great, good. That's good. Thank you. Nice to have you. And thanks to all the visitors. We welcome the visitors to our virtual meeting. At this time, if you are logged into the meeting with a phone number and not a name, please state your name so that we can add your name to the meeting minutes. And maybe, Rich, would it be better if they put, well.
So we only have to record them if they make a comment. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was just needed some clarification there. Thank you, Sarah. Public comment period will occur at the end of this meeting. And we're going to ask that we limit comments to 2 minutes per person. We'll take comments one right after the other. As a courtesy to everyone participating in this meeting, please place yourself on mute unless you are speaking to the group. I just want to back up a minute. We'll respond to the comments and questions after they've all been heard, to ensure that everyone who has a comment has time to participate. And finally, board motions and votes will be recorded in the minutes, and we will now turn our attention to the agenda. Okay, so let's take a look at the meetings from our January minutes, let's look at the minutes from our January meeting and see if there are any revisions needed. We can give ourselves a minute to just glance through. And board members, please just unmic at any point to weigh in if you are recommending any changes to the minutes that were sent out.
So Catherine, I reviewed them earlier and I find them okay. I move that we approve the minutes.
Thank you, Matt.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Brian. Okay. Minutes are approved.
So you just have to ask for a vote from the whole board so we can approve them.
Okay, sorry, I just had a little, just lost my screen for a minute. Okay. So let's vote. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 And all opposed, say nay or raise your hand. Okay. Thank you. Okay, we are gonna start with our one of our top priorities. We've been working on this for a while. And last meeting we agreed to put together kind of a preliminary dosing guidelines. And the department is continuing to work on a more comprehensive effort to update and take a deeper dive. But we've done a lot of work on looking at dosing guidelines over the previous years since the board was created. And thank you, Perry, for working on that simplified document that was sent out with a couple of revisions. In my opinion, they did not change the content of the dosing guidelines. Some of the wording and the intros were altered, and Lauren, thank you, made a couple of edits. Would people like to hear what they were? I just approved them all. The red line document that we ended up with was really hard to read. So I accepted the adjustments that the department made, but I'm realizing it's hard to see exactly where they were made. So I need a little guidance. Lauren, you could maybe highlight just the couple of changes that you made. Or should we allow ourselves time to read through for anyone who maybe didn't have a chance to before the meeting? What do people think?
This is Jennifer. I think they're great. I mean, I think the whole point of this was just to have some basic starting guidance for QMPs or LMPs to have a sort of idea of how to recommend these products to patients who have never used it before. And I think it's a really great starting guidance for them. It's not compelling, or restrictive. It's just a guidance document. So I like it.
Thank you, Jennifer. And thanks also for working on this behind the scenes with Sarah and the department. And I agree. And Perry, is there anything you want to add?
Sure. I think it's probably worth spending a minute or two sort of reviewing how we got here. Well, first of all, happy Valentine's Day, everybody. I can feel the love just bristling through the airwaves here, making the few hairs I have on my head still stand up. So thank you for the romantic gestures of the day. I hope everybody has a great day and evening with those who matter to you. And I really want to extend my appreciation to the many people through just board members, those involved in the Center for Medical Cannabis and the Department of Health and Human Services, many people and folks outside of those organizations, the public who attended last meeting and weighed in on this. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is the most inclusive process we've had in terms of numbers of people involved in sort of finalizing this latest iteration. And I think it's also important to go back and recognize those starting about 5 years ago when this process began, because even though this is now our sort of summary document for educational and guidance purposes for clinicians, and sort of I hope serves the best interests of all stakeholders. Although there are people on, some people are going to love it, some people are going to hate it, and that's just the nature of things. There will be disagreements, but I think the inclusiveness that's been involved in the efforts that so many put in, starting from 5 years ago, and I just want to recognize people like Mark Babbitts, Dr. Babbitts, who's now retired from the health department, Dr. Ed Red, who was, and Dr. Mike Crookston, two of the first chair and vice chair of the board, who really initiated this process of digging deep dives into the literature to try and get an understanding of what products and what doses was there some evidence for benefit, as well as would mitigate potential harms, and to try and find that optimal balance in order to meet the imperative that the legislature set forth to try and build an evidence-based approach to cannabis use in the state for medical purposes. And I think we've now arrived at a much more simplified document that does, as we approved as a board last month, build off of the only consensus document that's out there. And I think we all recognize the limitations of consensus documents, but essentially what they are is syntheses of comprehensive reviews of literature to get sort of to a reductionist view that experts from some of the leading academic and least research institutions in the world could come to agreement on. And I think we sort of agreed to follow in that course, and it sort of makes logical sense since it comports with everything that we had uncovered and had published previously through our publicly accessible documents and so forth. So that's where we arrive today. And I think the two, if we can go to the opening sentence and the last sentence, I think those are the key ones. One is the opening line is that the conventions of pharmacotherapeutics and medicine require dose-specific prescribing information based on results of methodologically sound studies evaluating safety and efficacy. So those are the conventions of medicine. That's what makes this a medical program. And then, of course, the next, excuse me, before you go on, let's go back to the beginning. The next sentence is really key. And that is that we have to recognize that we're really at the beginning phases of the science and understanding the medical implications of cannabis and cannabinoids for healthful purposes. And unfortunately, what we're stuck with is a dearth of validated condition-specific dose response curves for cannabis and its constituent cannabinoids. And so we have to just put things together as best we can. And I think that the number of voices that have inputted on this really reflect really sort of what the state of art and state of science are. So we end up then to the bottom where we've got some basic recommendations that sort of balance what we think we know about efficacy and safety. And then, of course, the final conclusion of this is that this, as the saying goes, every ending is a new beginning. And the new beginning here is that given that hopefully over the course of forthcoming months and years, there will be those who will be acting in good faith to continue on in this process. We'll make adjustments as needed and we'll continue to update this document. So it's a work in progress. And my hope is that the science will progress. In my view, we're 50 years behind the curve for a whole host of reasons in generating an understanding, a good scientific understanding of what the potential value for cannabis and cannabinoids might be for healthful purposes. But we're now into that now. I think we're finally recognize that there's some opportunity here to add to people's health and well-being in this. And if we look, in part of my reviews, I went past the published literature to a site called clinicaltrials.gov. Some of you may be familiar with it, but it basically lists every acknowledged listed clinical trial that's now ongoing and recruiting subjects for research in this area. And the important thing that I culled from that is that there are some good research trials going on. So hopefully we will be able to update this over time. And secondly, most of the dosing that's almost universally accepted for those clinical trials completely conform to or comport to what we've concluded as well, and what the authors of the consensus documented. So I think we're well aligned, and so with that explanation and gratitude for those who sort of initiated this process, and now we're at the end of this, at least this phase. I think the document is ready to get out to all stakeholders and see where we now go. I think the big challenge, sort of in my final kind of a comment here, is, and I think this will now segue into the next discussion point on the agenda, is how we will have products and formulations of cannabis and cannabinoid products in our registered pharmacies that will conform to and allow clinicians to who then inform themselves and educate themselves to make recommendations that are consistent with these guidelines, and that the subjects or patients or whatever you want to, people out in our, card holders in our program will be able to then access materials and products that are that follow these recommendations. So with that, Katie, I guess, we approved last month sort of unanimously that we would build this document. We would try and make it concise and build it off of the consensus document. I think those best efforts have now been met, and I think it'd probably be reasonable in sort of in the spirit and the letter of the statute, as well as the spirit of being transparent and this being an open public meeting, for the board to now consider this and approve it as the document that the Department of Health and Human Services will go forth with, and the Center for Medical Cannabis. It's our recommendation that they go forth and use this as the document for dosing guidelines and recommendations. So I'll leave it now to you, Katie, to proceed
Thank
as you
you.
think is appropriate.
Thank you, Perry. That's an important kind of contextual summary. Before we go to a vote, though, I do want to just check with any board members to see if there are any other comments.
Well, I'll jump in here, Catherine. I like the document as it stands for its simplicity, and I think that was the goal, because we have more information that fleshes this out. And I think some concerns were raised last month about some of the things that are lacking. So I think the challenge was trying to find the balance between simplicity and to be concise. It was helpful to me when I read something that said, oh, beginners should do 1 to 5 milligrams, experienced users 5 to 10, and professional users 10 to 20. So you look at that and say, well, 40 is really high. Most people aren't going to need 20 to 40 milligrams, but I guess based on the literature, it's still considered at least safe to some degree for tolerant users. So that's the fence, 40. But I think it's helpful to have something that says, well, the majority of people are going to fit in one of these 3 buckets: 1 to 5, 5 to 10, and 10 to 15, or 10 to 20. But including that now would add a lot more text that might not be useful. So that's why I hope, as we go along, we continue to educate providers. And I think what Perry said is great. This assumes that people are going to educate themselves more.
Yeah, good. I appreciate that, Matt. And the biggest difference between what we have up on the screen now and what was created, Perry says 5 years ago. I feel like everything pre-COVID is about 2 years ago. So years ago, which is sitting on our website right now as dosing guidelines for all qualified conditions, which is a little unconventional, but that's as Perry has said, comports with the literature. But the biggest difference is that 40 milligram max. So in our recommendations, we had similar initial doses, similar titration schedules. But the maximum was actually written out as 15 milligrams. And there was a cautionary note that said doses above 30 can be problematic and lead to a cannabis use disorder, and patients need to be screened for that. So you're exactly right, Matt. The way I look at this though, and I appreciate Jennifer's words on this, these are not restrictive. These are guidelines that we hope will give physicians the confidence that they're not acting alone and kind of taking a stab in the dark. And what it says is the dose is titrated by 2.5 milligrams as tolerated until 40 milligrams. So, you know, reading that tells physicians that they need to be checking and educating themselves and their patients about what tolerance is. Tolerance isn't, we could go on and on about that, but I appreciate that you highlighted that particular part. It's the part that jumped out at me as kind of the kind of biggest change that we made. But I also agree that this, as when viewed from the lens of non-restrictive guidelines, it's a very important document for us to have and to distribute. And so my question, I mean, we'll need to vote to approve this, as Perry has said, and this will segue very nicely into the next topic on our agenda. But you know, we don't have any ability to get this into the hands of physicians. And I think we've learned our lesson over the years that things that sit on our website do just that. They sit on the website. And so my hope is that this information is distributed, you know, through UMA, through BLAST, through Matt, your kind of peer-to-peer educational efforts. And this is, to me, the essential piece that's missing. We have it, we know it, we've worked with this for years, but we really do hope that the department will work to get this out into the hands of physicians. So with that, any other comments? And then I do believe we need to move to a vote. Okay, all right.
We'll make a motion to vote.
Thank you, Matt.
I'll second
Thank you.
the approval.
Okay, so all in favor of approving this document as it stands, say aye.
Aye.
Or raise your hand. All opposed, say aye or raise your hand. Okay, that sounds like a unanimous approval. So this next topic is also, you know, what we put in our report to the legislators, as well as our annual report. We've kind of stuck with those components and matched our agenda. That's been my goal over the past several months. You know, there's a lot to be done, but I think we can only take a little spoonful of the mountain that needs to be created here. And the next related topic is this concept of creating some sort of a formulary that the pharmacies are participating in. And I think some people are calling it a product list. I think exactly how to define this is probably still in the works, but the need is something we've identified over the years and really kind of focused in on over the past one and a half years. We can't, we have no foundation for further research. If there's no consensus in terms of what's going to be found on the shelves in the pharmacy. And no way, we need some way to kind of bring that into this program. And I'm gonna guess that there's, as Perry mentioned, kind of different views on that, but I don't want to lose sight of that. And that's why I really wanted, I advocated that we put this on our agenda toward the top and have a discussion. I think there's some brainstorming to be done. I think maybe some clarification as well. And I would invite the board members to jump in and kind of share what their thoughts are, ask questions if there need to be any reminders or clarifications in terms of the work we've already done on this. And to kind of get an understanding of what the obstacles are to this as we try to advise the Department of Health. Because dosing guidelines will not be effective. We can educate the physicians and the patients with these dosing guidelines, but if there's no way for them to easily access products that align with the dosing guidelines, and no uniformity to what people are picking up, and no way to monitor that or observe that or get some sort of feedback from that, we're really going to be treading water. So this is a really important topic in terms of my agenda. And so I just would like to turn it over to the board members to see where we need to go with this.
Dr. Carlson, if I could just take a moment to update the board on where we're at with this project, would that be okay? And then board members are welcome to share their thoughts, of course, like you requested. So we have asked our data analysts to put together data from our database to categorize medical cannabis products that are available for purchase in the market, and to categorize them according to various dosage types, like concentrates, gummies, flour, and others, and to then break those down by products that we would categorize as having a low dose THC, those that have a medium dose THC, and those that have a high THC level. And there are some limitations to the data, and it's requiring some cleanup as our data analyst engages in that project. But despite the challenges in it, we see a way forward of having at least some information that will be available, and we expect to be able to put something together by the next board meeting that could be shared with board members at that meeting, and it could be discussed. Long term, what we hope to do is to work with a software vendor in setting some parameters and rules to how products are described inside of our software by the medical cannabis processors registered by the Department of Agriculture and Food. And that will allow us to start from scratch on setting some of those parameters so the processors know that they're locked into certain data points that are descriptors of their product, right? And that'll help us then inform providers and the industry and patients and parents about, here's what we see in the inventory on such and such date. One of the limitations always is that, especially in still a young program like ours, is that there are products that will on occasion run out, and you'll have to find a similar product potentially. If you're only interested in going to one medical cannabis pharmacy, you'd have to maybe find something else that may work. So that is a project that we've engaged in, and we will inform board members and stakeholders as we move forward with that. We're pleased that despite the limitations, we think there's still a way forward to put something useful together.
Katie, first of all, thanks, Rich. That's really helpful to know that you're on top of that moving forward. Could I ask a question and maybe address it to Misty as sort of our resident pharmacy expert here? You know, it would seem to me what would be reasonable, and of course, what I think is reasonable may not be reasonable, but you know, in terms of normal operating or standard operating procedures, in terms of what's required under Pharmacy Act, and am I mistaken that pharmacies that carry not only, I mean, all products, but especially controlled substances, have to maintain an inventory of what they have by you know, product description that would include you know, the numbers of them, the formulations, and the dosages of them, and it would be available for sort of accounting purposes or auditing purposes. Isn't that just sort of standard operating procedure? And if so, then shouldn't we expect that out of registered cannabis pharmacies, that it would sort of fall under the same general good practices for having accounting of their inventory and being able to sort of publicly represent it, so that all the burden doesn't fall on Rich and his staff to go after it and try and figure it out independently, but basically to be provided with inventory numbers on an ongoing basis. And these are sort of computer-based programs that are really pretty simple and accessible. And I'm confused as to why this is so complicated, I guess.
Can I say something there? The reason why is it's not really regulated the same as like FDA prescriptions, right? Where you have standardized dosing, standardized configurations of each dosings. Each pharmacy could have a similar product, but name it something different in the system.
Yeah, so I'm not talking about naming. I'm talking about
right,
what that product is, what the formula. This goes back to the basics. It's not about FDA and anything whatsoever.
It's
just
about
simply
standardization of data is what it is.
Let me see if Misty can help clarify at least what the regulations
Certainly,
are.
if there's one thing pharmacies do well, it's record keeping, just from an administrative standpoint, and also for the maintenance of the pharmacy's licensing. Those records have to be maintained and are audited regularly.
That's really helpful. I'm glad that you brought Misty into this, because I think that's what we would want to mimic in whatever way possible, given all of the differences between, the standard pharmacy and these pharmacies. But I think just like with dosing guidelines, Misty, I would be curious to hear what you think about directing this program to mimic that process and that standard.
I think it's absolutely necessary that there be some standardization of how the accounting is performed, just so that there is a accountability and an ability to manage their inventory and prevent diversion.
Yeah, so it's got multiple purposes, that preventing diversion, and tying licensure to that,
Yes.
as well as usability.
It's also a good business practice. I mean, it maintaining and being aware of what product you have in inventory, and monitoring the usage and shortfalls allows you to plan accordingly, so that you're not left without product that is needed.
And-
So
And we do
most pharmacies have
inventory
managers for that.
audits.
Yes.
I
Sorry,
just wanted
Misty,
to-
I didn't hear the very last part of what Misty said.
There's usually, there's usually, it's usually built into whatever software is being utilized by the pharmacy, and that can differ from hospital to hospital, or group to group, but the accounting is usually tied into that.
Okay, thank you, Misty. And Dr. Hoffman, please go ahead.
Yeah, I do think that it would be very helpful for this board to hear a more formal presentation around what our auditing process looks like related to inventory control in all of the pharmacies, so that you just have an understanding of the baseline before we spend too much time proposing enhancements to that. When I spoke with you, Katie, it was clear to me that you may not have full view of what we are doing to regulate the pharmacies. And I think that would be an important starting place from which we can get some additional advice from all of you as our advisors. So I've asked Rich and his team to prepare a presentation for the next meeting so that we can kind of get that shared understanding. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, very helpful. And you're absolutely right. Just to clarify, this discussion right now is not to enhance the system. That we have just really been trying to project that is an essential piece of a medical program. And you're absolutely right. We don't know where the department or the program is in that process. And so I would say maybe from that we can maybe enhance kind of some of the feedback and distribution of knowledge so that what the board is working on is useful to the department and vice versa. So I really appreciate that, and I'll look forward to that next month. I saw a couple other questions. If someone wants to monitor that, I think from department members as well as Rich.
I think Jesse Hockley, our data analyst, had a comment, right? Yes.
Yeah, Jesse,
Yeah,
please go ahead. Thank you.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I kind of just wanted to go into the data issues a little bit. So this might be something that necessitates a full presentation. Like I said, we sort of have gone through this a little bit before in like the previous attempts at doing a product list that I have done. So I just want to kind of clarify a few things. But to start with, what Misty said is essentially what we do have, of course, auditable data. We have essentially, every single product listed in our database. The issue, I think, kind of does center around that our database, the developer we worked with, in a lot of major ways was kind of centered around a more retail-like program rather than a medical program. It's very good at tracking. It's pretty good at tracking sales, and of course we have everything listed. We can track people's dosage guidelines, and thanks to our lab, we have a very good record of what percentages of cannabinoids are in each product. The issue lies especially kind of just in the structure itself of the database. So Kathy, you did mention that sorry, one sec. You did mention that we don't want this to become a structural change, but I just kind of want to mention that we do sort of need some structural changes in order to make this a more useful product list. At the moment, the biggest problem is the weight of the product, essentially. That weight of the product, pieces in a product. These things are a bit more inconsistent in our database and really do need a lot of updates. And at the current moment, in order for me to get it, I need to do a lot of regular expression harvesting of data in order to get a good approximation of things. And we really do just need some systematic changes, and we can get more into that later if need
Yeah,
be.
and our plan is
Thank
to
you.
incorporate all of that into our next software that we'll be doing. So Jessa will be a part of that. And so board members will also get some input from you as well.
Great. And I see that Misty go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up. There's very detailed documents available through the DEA's website for the biennial controlled substance inventory that needs to be completed in healthcare settings, and their regulations for controlled substances within healthcare settings, and basically what's expected to be filled out. So those forms are all available through the DEA's website.
And I just wanted to add as well, we are also working on, improving, including some of our information in the controlled substance database, which again, we need systematic changes before we can really do that as well. So the guidelines to help us add to the controlled substance database are similar to the issues we need to change here.
Yeah, thank you for this is really illuminating. And I would say similar to dosing guidelines, we have the Cadillac version that we're working toward that's out there and is going to be dependent on more data and more evaluation of what's happening to patients in our states and other states. I can make a comparison to this effort that, that getting the proper technology that's medical, the foundation is medical as opposed to retail. I hear that as costly and time consuming, yet necessary, and something that you're working toward. I'm curious about what could be done in the interim as kind of a stepping stone or stopgap measure. Is there anything that could be done, and what would that be?
There is, and that's what Jesse is working on, and that we can share more about at our next meeting.
Yeah, and I should also add that, I don't know, at most, maybe I'll be able to get like 70% of products like on some sort of product list. And even then, there's going to be a lot of data manipulation required in order to make that feasible. So it's not, there's probably going to be some oddities to say the least.
It's a start, and we want to, it is a priority, Dr. Carlson and board members. We want to be able to make this available to providers, to patients, to parents, so they can see what's available out there. It'll have its limitations, and we'll just make sure that people are aware of those.
Yeah, I think we're all used to the foundation of limitations in this program. Yeah, I would assume, and I know we'll learn a lot next month. Now, I'm probably jumping ahead of myself, but licensure for the pharmacies, I would think, would be dependent on cooperating with this process, fully cooperating and participating, so that this isn't kind of a battle or a heavy lifting done all by a couple of staff members at the Department of Health.
No, we'll involve the pharmacies individually and some of the pharmacists that work there as we put this together. We want it to be useful to them, and then we'll also involve them in the creation of a new system that identifies the data points that we'll be collecting, and those that will be the most helpful to a pharmacist, right, and to a medical provider who are guiding the patients as they choose which product they purchase. It's important that they have the information about the products.
Yeah,
so we'll involve them.
Yeah, and it's we keep learning as we go along, maybe, and then in retrospect see maybe where there were some errors in terms of decisions. So many of these decisions are made without really knowing what the consequences are, what the bigger picture is. So, you know, I'm just curious what kind of input you're getting as you try to switch from this more retail-oriented system to a medical system, and you know, where so getting some guidelines so that this next system is going to achieve the goals of the department. You know, I'm curious about who's running that, who's in charge of that, and what's their background and qualifications.
Yeah, so the software that we are wanting to go toward would be one that allows us as a medical state to customize the system, and that allows the individual medical cannabis pharmacies to choose their own their own software, but then we will set requirements for specific data points that it must provide to our what we call an inventory control system hub. Okay, and so as state agencies between Department of Agriculture and us, we will control the endpoints that we require, and we'll control how the patients, or excuse me, how the processors, what data they are required to provide. And we can work with members of the industry, with providers like Matt McKiff as a consultant, and others in helping us determine what endpoints we require be provided to the software hub that we can then use to inform the industry and also patients and providers about the different products that are available for purchase. And we can run reports on availability over time of certain types of products that are low dose, medium dose, and high dose. And so that's where we're at, we're ensuring that we're choosing a software that provides us the flexibility to require certain endpoints that we know will help benefit providers and patients and inform them better than our current system does. So the Department of Health and Human Services will be making those decisions with help from Department of Agriculture and Food, and also Katie with help from providers like some of you and pharmacists that are working in the medical cannabis pharmacies as well.
So can I just
I can update you on that. I can update the board on how that is going and how we are incorporating that input as we move forward. I can include that in future presentations.
Thanks, Rich. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I just want to add to that as this effort goes, you know, forward and trying to organize massive amounts of detailed data. I just want to remind, you know, the endpoint, whatever product, whatever the endpoint is, remind that from a clinical perspective, really what we do in clinical medicine is try to distill it down to very simple things. And so for me, meeting with patients, it comes down to three things: route, ratio, and dose, right? And that's what I want to see when I see some kind of formulary or something. I want route, ratio, and dose. I don't care about the name. I don't care about grape flavor. I care about route, ratio, and dose. And a lot of the things have been reported now. I mean, I'm on the website right now looking at my patient, what they bought. I can see everything but the ratio. I don't know what ratio. And when I start making decisions clinically about how to treat people, that's what makes cannabis magic, by the way, is the ratio, is how much THC and how much CBD and how they're balanced. That's where it is. And when that's not reported, it's really harmful, or it's really hard, you know. And I don't know if the terminology that we put in the original documents, chemotype 1, 2, and 3, I don't know how much that's catching on. You know, it seems like people are, it's easier to say, well, THC rich, balanced, or CBD rich products, you know, if we put it into 3 categories. But in any event, in educating providers and educating patients, that's essential, and that needs to be in that database somehow. And however it is categorized or reported, that'll have to be up to the people who know what they're doing with all that information. But clinicians need that simple 3 distillation down to 3 things so that we can make decisions off of that.
Agreed, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Well said. Are there other comments related to this formulary in this area of our agenda? Okay, and I believe that Dr. Moss is here, and he has attended a meeting since our last meeting, a highway safety meeting. So I believe he has some updates for us. So let's turn this over to you, Mike, and thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. I don't think I'll need that full 15 minutes. I think, unfortunately, what I will tell you is pretty similar to what you heard when we had the presentation, I think last year from the visitor from Highway Safety. So I was able to attend their meeting. I gave a similar presentation as I did to the board, just kind of about what we know about driving and cannabis and impairment, and how can we tell who's impaired? Do we have a threshold like we do for alcohol, et cetera? And gave them some more context there to that group. We're about the same spot as we were, as there's a lot of cannabis associated accidents and fatalities occurring. The way all of these fatalities are tracked is that if the drug is detected at all, even the metabolite that is not active, we call THC COOH or THC acid, then that can be tabulated as a cannabis associated fatality, even though there's none of the active drug in there in the patient's system at the time of the accident. The forensic lab for the state reports out everything that they find when they get these samples submitted for an impaired driving case, looking for alcohol as the standard, and then checking these other things, including cannabis. And so they report out everything, and then it's up to the traffic end of what do they associate with that, and what do they call drug associated or not. And they're not necessarily making a claim of this was drug caused. And then it's a different matter for a prosecutor to decide that someone was impaired and want to go after them for that matter. So what all that means is it's really complicated to know what is going on from a driving standpoint with cannabis. As a reminder to everybody, cannabis is harder to study than alcohol with driving. We have decades and decades of alcohol research. We have far less cannabis research, but we do know at least that cannabis causes some impairment, and that it's probably associated with some increase in traffic accidents, though not to the same degree as alcohol. It's probably worse when you combine it with alcohol, and just like anything else, you shouldn't drive under the influence of something, whether it's a prescription medication or alcohol or cannabis. There's still no mechanism to identify the source of the cannabis in these. That is, there's no linkage to patients who have a medical card and are getting cannabis that way versus not, or tied to like the controlled substance database for other prescription medications. So that's still a big limitation to the data, as we don't know what the source is, whether these patients are medical cannabis or not. We do know from other states that have tried to look at associations of like a before and after study of no cannabis then medical cannabis, or no cannabis then recreational cannabis. And there is some increase in patients who have cannabis in their system driving, right? No surprise, when more cannabis is out there, more people are going to have it in their blood and urine. Does that mean there are more accidents occurring or not? Hard to say, right? A lot of data is old from when cannabis was not as accepted as it is now, and maybe people were using their medical cannabis at home and they didn't leave the house. And with more cannabis acceptance, people are going out and doing things, and we're finding, other places in California or Colorado or having moves to have, cannabis smoking lounges where you can go and smoke cannabis at a bar. for instance, that didn't used to be a thing. So all of this is going to be shifting and changing. So that's kind of my update is cannabis is out there. There are people who have it in their blood and urine when they're involved in a traffic accident. Determining whether any single case was due to cannabis or not is super difficult, especially when we're talking about all these different metabolites and how long was it since someone used, and are they a regular user versus an intermittent user? And I also have essentially no insight as to whether these are patients using medical products versus recreational products purchased from other states. So I have a lot more big question marks than I have answers. And I asked the group if they had anything they wanted me to bring back to this board, and this was about what they had. I don't know what the next steps would be. I think it'd be really interesting to know which patients were involved in fatal accidents and had medical cards, but I also don't want the appearance of getting anyone in trouble or having health information being used for legal purposes that way. But certainly from a health standpoint, we want to know what's happening on our roads with fatalities, and is there education we can do to patients and providers, recommenders to reduce the potential impacts that cannabis could have on people driving while impaired.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. That's helpful. And yeah, it sounds like I'm curious what, besides you, what kind of partnership the Department of Health has with the Department of Highway Safety as they're trying to figure out what to do with these kind of unanswered questions and nebulous areas that impact public health or relate to the growth of this program. I think having you bring this information back to us and sharing with them is really helpful in itself. But it does seem like over the upcoming years, there will, I hope there's a way to get some answers to some of the questions that you and the department will have. I don't think that will happen passively. So I'm just wondering, what mechanisms might be in place to bring that about.
Yeah, Dr. Carlson, I can just touch on that. I feel that in the future, we do have some opportunities potentially with grant funding to be able to invest in some projects that would help add some resources to some coordination of taking a look at some data on our end and connecting with data from the Department of Public Safety and involving some experts to really clean the data and to analyze it and share it in a way that can be useful to individuals that are policymakers or scientists or whatever. And so I would say that it requires funding to engage in some of those projects, to do it in the right way. And I'm hopeful that in the future, there'll be some grants that might be available to researchers who could really do a good job of setting up some data sharing agreements potentially under approval of a CRRB. And they can take a look at some of that detail. Looks like Sarah has a few thoughts as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking of this new legislation that's talking about developing the research center that could potentially be something that they could apply to get funding for, would be to research highway safety and public intoxication, and trying to find more concrete information as to how different users are impacted by cannabis.
I would say I am nothing if not pragmatic, with background in emergency medicine and otherwise. Like, what would I do with that new information or data, right? I think what we could do already, and I should have looked this up before, but I don't remember what recommendations we have out there for patients or providers as far as language around driving. And that's the most simple thing that we could do, no matter what we're seeing in Utah or not. It's telling people don't do it. You go see the billboards around town that say from NHTSA, saying, don't drive while you're high. So we're already having, public service sort of announcements there from federal colleagues. And I think that would be the most simple thing. Whatever is occurring is making sure that everyone knows the potential risks. And having more data specific to Utah is fantastic, but in the meantime, nothing to stop us from making sure people are informed about what they're using. And I don't recall what language we do or don't have in there. I apologize. I should have looked that up again.
That's a great point, Mike. It is in, again, our website that just sits on our website. It is there in terms of cautions. I don't remember specifically, but that this did come up, and you know that you're right. We, like so many areas, we need to have some language and some messaging that can help guide, although at the same time, we're trying to get some better information to create some language that would be more helpful. So we're kind of, but we shouldn't be waiting for the perfect kind of data to appear. You're right. There's
We
just
can be proactive.
So, and
yeah,
and
exactly.
we do have, for the Compassionate Use Board, we have a letter that goes out to all approved candidates and gives them recommendations for, waiting to drive, drug interactions, those types of things. And we are currently going to update our other patient approval letters to give them some other types of guidance to go along with that as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I can't remember, I feel my memory is that there was some sort of time recommendation, don't drive.
Yeah, let's see. On our CUB website, we have cannabis use recommendations. And let me just get that document pulled up here.
And while she tracks that down, Dr. Carlson and board members, I can just share that there's a warning that by law is required to appear on every medical cannabis product purchased on the container label. And that warning states cannabis has intoxicating effects and may be addictive. Do not operate a vehicle or machinery under its influence. Keep out of reach of children. This product is for medical use only. Use only as directed by a recommending medical provider.
Yeah.
And so the document we have says patients should not drive for at least 8 hours after taking cannabis into their lungs, and patients should not drive for at least 10 hours after taking cannabis by mouth.
That's interesting. I think that maybe needs to be looked at, Mike. I'd be curious to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I am on the record in multiple places of various, like either the CME courses or otherwise, of saying something slightly shorter. Certainly those windows are conservative and will catch basically everybody who might be impaired after cannabis use waiting that long. Certainly inhalation via vaping or smoking is shorter than ingestion, just because it takes so long to build things up when you take edibles, and maybe it's more on the 4 to 6 hour mark or for inhalation and 6 to 8 for edibles. So could those be fudged in an hour or two down, perhaps? I know there are other states that have recommendations into that same realm of things. A lot of the data is from experimental things where you have patients come in, they smoke once, and then you put them in a driving simulator, or you do a test for a few hours. And how does that apply to patients who are using every day? All those questions are different. So if anything, I think those are very conservative recommendations. You also want to make a recommendation that people are going to follow, right? And if you tell them you can't drive for the whole rest of the day, then they may ignore that. But you want people to be safe. And so is there a way to make the best recommendation? I think the obvious thing is just what is the science out there? So I'd be happy to look at it to change it. I'm not so opposed to that, but it is probably on the conservative end of waiting quite a long time, and maybe a bit longer than what some other states are recommending.
And this was specific to the Compassionate Use Board patients. So, and the physicians there came up with that guidance with the information they read through. But yeah.
Well, that's great. I mean, we've got something out there, and like so many pieces, it's a kind of a moving target, and continuous efforts to improve and make more useful all of these recommendations. So I think that's a helpful discussion. And Mike, thank you. We'll continue to put you on the agenda if okay with you. I don't know if when's the next highway safety meeting?
They meet quarterly. And I
Okay.
know their next one was supposed to be on one day, and then whoever leads it was going to be on vacation. And so it may not be
Okay.
for a couple more of our meetings until we meet
Okay.
again. If I can find it on my calendar.
Okay, we'll try to remember that. So maybe not next time, maybe the March meeting, maybe the April meeting.
Yeah, I think it's
Maybe the
April is
May.
when the next one is supposed to be, is April, and depending on which week it falls, I may
Okay,
not attend it till after that. So I'll keep an eye on it, and then if I see an agenda come out, I can shoot someone an email to
okay.
just put me on there or not, and I'll keep attending. And
That
I
would
guess I will pose the question again. Anything you want me to now go back to the next quarterly meeting and ask for beyond what we've the kind of the updates I've shared here? I think we now kind of have both groups on the same page. If there is an issue, we don't have all the information we might like. We know cannabis causes some impairment and probably is not good to drive, but I'd be happy to take back any other specific questions or anything else you want from the board.
Any board members want to respond to that? Or department? Yeah, I think just kind of continue, the continual reminder that we're here and they're there, and we have some overlapping interests is really, really helpful in itself. And I suppose, Mike, if we can let you know if some specifics come up over the next few months. So, okay. This next section is just a quick, I just want to clarify, we sent out a lot of material. Thank you, Lauren and Sarah, for pulling that together on insomnia and cannabis. We were asked by the legislators to look into that and come up with a recommendation similar to other qualifying conditions or potentially qualifying conditions, to look at what the strength of the data is and what we can discern in terms of risk, safety, and potential benefits. So this is a big ask, but I am asking all board members to read through those materials. I think there are about 7 articles on insomnia. And I'm going to guess we maybe could do some emailing back and forth and prep. And I'm also hoping, if possible, that Lauren can really kind of do some of the heavy lifting. I know all of that is, that's a request. I understand that may not be possible, but when we're asked by the legislators to look into this, I think it's really important that we respond. So I hope we can take some time to read those materials, and maybe the department can send some reminders. I'm not annoyed by reminders. I appreciate reminders and nudges and all of that. So unless others object, I think that would be helpful. And then we were also asked to look into anxiety, which we already did. We didn't put together a real detailed statement. I think it's called a whereas statement, and that was sent out to everyone. It's on our website also. But and then Lauren, I believe, found a couple of new articles that we could look at and see if there's any change that we would want to make to what we already concluded as far as anxiety. So and then we are lining up Dr. Adam Gordon, who has spoken to the board previously, to come and just update us on information related to cannabis use disorder. See how medical and recreational programs are impacting that in various states, including Utah. So that's it for that section, and let's pass it over to you, Rich.
Great. Okay, so I just wanted to share some information about some of the legislation that's being considered that impacts medical cannabis laws in Utah. The legislative session, as many of you know, has been going on since January. It ends in early March. And just this morning, there was a bill, House Bill 72, medical cannabis governance revisions. Representative Brooks has proposed that, and Senator Vickers is the Senate sponsor. And that got through committee this morning, the Senate Health and Human Services Committee. recommended that for approval. And so it's already gone through the state house. And so now it's being considered in the Senate. And what that does is it moves
Rich, can
oversight.
you say again what that is? I'm sorry, I had some trouble hearing. The
Oh, yeah,
beginning
no
part of
problem.
your
So the House Bill 72 Medical Cannabis Governance Revisions, that moves oversight and regulation of pharmacies and the medical cannabis couriers from the Department of Health and Human Services to the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. It also moves the registration of medical cannabis pharmacy agents and medical cannabis couriers from health over to Department of Agriculture and Food. We will continue to register medical cannabis patients, cardholders, and then also the guardians and the caregivers, also the pharmacy medical providers, the pharmacists that work in the pharmacies, and then also the qualified medical providers will maintain oversight over those participants in the program. It also creates a transition period where Department of Agriculture and Food may seek assistance from Department of Health and Human Services as it begins to fulfill its new duties and takes over some of that regulation of the pharmacies and couriers. So that transition period is expected to begin in July, and we expect to, as we coordinate, to also have, like, for example, the fees that we collect from pharmacies, those will transition over under the bill to be collected by Department of Agriculture in July. Also, HB 72 creates a 9-member medical cannabis advisory board, and it outlines the duties of the board. And that part of the legislation becomes effective in May of 2023 of this year. So once this bill passes, we'll be identifying board members that we would want to select for that. I believe that the Department of Health, I think, appoints 4 of those members, 4 or 5 members of that board, and then Department of Agriculture appoints some as well. The role of that board, and I want to emphasize also that that board will include 1 medical cannabis researcher or medical researcher, excuse me, and then 1 qualified medical provider. And so we'll be selecting who those will be, and then there'll be a representative from the cannabis cultivation and processing licensees. There's also a representative of the medical cannabis pharmacies. There's a patient advocate representative. There's a medical cannabis cardholder representative. And there's just a public person that has no stake in the industry or program and just wants to volunteer their time on the board, and 1 representative from law enforcement. So, and there's 9 members, and they'll, the Department of Health and Human Services and Ag will share, for example, administrative rules that we're proposing, and the board will give us their input on those rules. The board won't have a final decision about the rules or control and have veto power on them, but we really see this as a valuable resource to get input on the rules in having this board. So also Department of Agriculture, for example, they'll just consult with the board about cultivation facility licenses and pharmacy licenses, issuing an additional of those. And we are to also consult with the board about cannabis patient education and about the reasonableness of fees that we set. So those are some of the duties that the board would have. Are there any questions about HB 72? That's just one of the 5 bills that impact our program. If there are any, you're welcome to reach out after this meeting as well, and I can answer questions. But a second bill that has some impact, in fact, on the Cannabis Research Review Board is HB 230, and that's HB 230 is Center for Medical Cannabis Research. And what this does is it creates the Center for Medical Cannabis Research within the University of Utah, and it changes the requirements to be a member of of the Cannabis Research Review Board. It just states in the bill language that it requires that there be 4 qualified medical provider members of the CRRB, which we already have. And then the 2 of them must at least have 100 patients with a medical cannabis card. And we do already meet that requirement. 2 of the board members do have at least 100 patients. But they wanted to just put that in statute. So that's being put into the statute to require that. And the Center for Medical Cannabis Research within the University of Utah, it'll have a few duties, and the duties have been simplified when you compare it to an earlier version of the bill. And so those duties are to facilitate pilot funding for research related to the health effects of cannabis products, and also to facilitate coordination of medical cannabis research projects conducted by researchers at the center and eligible institutions like Utah State University, for example. They of course have a specialty in agriculture and are interested in potentially qualifying for some grants in the future. So the center would support researchers in applying for research grant funding, and they'll conduct a literature review of medical cannabis research. They'll provide the results of their literature review to the Cannabis Research Review Board, so to this board, which is, I think, a good connection. And then they will request information from some of the universities in Utah to help with the research. And this medical research center is required to submit a report to the Health and Human Services Committee, interim committee, by November 1 of each year. A critical piece that impacts our program is that the bill also allows funds from the Qualifying Patient Enterprise Fund, which is our fund, the medical cannabis card fees, the $3 transaction fee that we get from every transaction, the medical cannabis pharmacy licensing fees, those all go into this enterprise fund. And this bill just enables us to contribute funds to the medical cannabis research at the University of Utah program. So the intent here from Representative Daley Provo is to make it so we help this Center for Cannabis Research get off the ground, and that long-term potentially they would get enough funding and grants, whatever, depending on changes in federal law and things, to be self-funded. But initially we would help with starting some of the upfront funding that's needed to get things started. So are there any questions about HB 230, Center for Medical Cannabis Research?
Did that language get changed at the our board is not being abolished and moved inside that University of Utah Research Center, that said they would both exist and both have, separate but complementary duties?
Yes. Right. Yeah. The very first version of the legislation did dissolve the CRRB, but it was amended to require that the CRRB continue, and in fact, to require that the Center for Cannabis Research at the U report to the Cannabis Research Review Board, which I think is a good connection there. Yeah, good question. And I was just checking on the status of that right now. So it's passed through the House and now it's in the Senate. That was HB 230. Okay. And then SB 137, medical cannabis amendments. That's the primary sponsor of that is Senator Escamilla, and I believe Representative Ward is the House sponsor of that. This includes a lot of amendments that the Department of Health and Human Services requested, but there's also a lot of amendments that the industry got in there, and the patient advocates And for example, one critical amendment this bill makes is that it extends the medical cannabis processing timeframe or the period during which a patient is issued a card is extended from 6 months to 1 year. Also, this legislation increases a medical provider's patient cap requirements from the 275 and 600. That's the current standard, and it changes that to 2% of the total amount of medical cannabis card holders. So, for example, right now there's about 62,000 medical cannabis card holders. And if this bill passes without amendment, it would, at 62,000, that would mean that a provider would be limited to 1,200 patients. So that is a critical change that will allow a provider to take on more patients. And then also, if a qualified medical provider receives payment from an insurance plan for services, then the patient whose insurance plan was billed does not count toward the 2% patient cap. So that is in there to incentivize qualified medical providers to not just accept cash and not accept insurance, but to run their practice in a way that they qualify to charge insurance and get on panels. And that certainly helps the patient as they try to make the evaluation service more affordable, as if they can use insurance to help cover that cost. Also, SB 137, it allows a QMP or the employee of a QMP to prepare an application for a medical cannabis card holder that may be non-tech savvy or elderly and isn't able to work with a computer or on the phone to apply for a card. The QMP or their proxy can just start that application for the patient, and also they can pay for the $15 application fee on behalf of the patient. And so this just clarifies the law to allow for that to happen. So we do expect that there will be some people that maybe have just found it difficult to work with technology. The medical clinic will be better able to help them pay the fee for them and help them get that medical cannabis card. Also, this bill allows a physician assistant who is qualified to specialize in mental health care to diagnose PTSD that becomes a qualifying condition for a patient. So right now in the law, a PA is not under that ability in the current statute. So this just makes it so a PA could do it, but they would have to have the specialty in mental health care. And there's a specific accreditation they get to do that. So if they do indeed have that, then they'd be able to diagnose the PTSD that someone used in order to get a medical cannabis card. Also, the bill allows the Compassionate Use Board to review, approve, or deny the use of medical cannabis device or a product that may be used for inhalation. And if the Compassionate Use Board feels strongly that a particular patient should not be able to buy a certain type of product, then they'd be able to place that restriction. Also, the bill allows for certain patients to do their initial medical cannabis visit virtually. This is only for patients on hospice that have terminal illness or who are a resident of an assisted living or nursing care facility. So everybody else will continue to be required to have that in-person virtual visit, but it's intended for those that are bedridden, right, that can't go to a doctor's office, that they would be able to do it virtually if that was necessary and if they prefer to do it that way. And then there is a clarification that a pharmacy about some restrictions on advertising and targeted marketing. There's some definitions that are added to the statute to clarify what those restrictions are and how those terms are defined in the law. Okay, so that Any questions about Senate Bill 137? And then I'm going to try to just be quick on SB 91. SB 91 is medical cannabis regulation amendments. This is Senator Vickers is the sponsor, and Brooks, Representative Brooks is the House sponsor. And in this bill, this is the bill that's intended to address the concerns about synthetic cannabinoids, right? So under this bill, Department of Agriculture and Food may make rules to immediately ban and limit the presence of any substance in a medical cannabis product after receiving a recommendation to do so from a public health authority like DHHS. So that is one critical amendment there. And then it also allows Department of Ag to issue more than 4 independent testing lab licenses. There's no need for a limit there. So it also replaces the term synthetic cannabinoid with the term artificially derived cannabinoid. Department of Ag felt like that was a better term to use throughout the bill. And so just intended to better define ingredients that are of concern. And then also that bill requires that medical cannabis products intended for inhalation or those that produce cannabis smoke include a warning label specifically dedicated to that warning. And also the bill requires that heavy metal testing is conducted on vaporizer cartridges used with a cannabis product. And there's also an amendment that Representative Eleison, I think that's how you say his last name, would require that beginning January 2024, all cannabis product containers would be required to have a warning label that states that using the product may cause mental illness. So that is not a part of the bill yet. It's just a House amendment that, based on the public discussion that was going on when this bill went before committee, it sounded like that would be added later on. So we'll look for that to happen in SB 91. And then there's HB 227. This is hemp amendments. That, of course, relates to the hemp program that Ag runs. We're indirectly involved in that, but we don't have any regulatory authority over it. But we do care about what they're doing. And of course, we are following it. And what it does, that further defines what a cannabinoid product is. So products with certain levels of THC are not allowed in the hemp program. There's just some language that needed to be cleaned up to truly make the program restricted to hemp and not allow for a THC to be at levels where it's has its psychoactive effect. And right now there are some gaps in the law that some of the companies that are involved in that program are taking advantage of, and so this just plugs those gaps. Also, businesses would not be able to sell or give a product with certain hemp products to an individual under the age of 21. If they have certain properties, they wouldn't be able to sell it to anyone under 21. And then it also does give Department of Agriculture the ability to make rules that immediately ban or limit the presence of any substance in a hemp product. And okay, so that's HB 227. And then one final bill that was just released last Thursday night that we are reviewing closely is House Bill 200. This is the psilocybin prescription amendments. And Senator Escamilla is proposing this legislation. And I did not see a House sponsor on it yet, but what this bill does is it creates a regulatory structure for the state's medical psilocybin program. And it splits duties between DHHS and UDAF. And the bill creates a way for individuals with depression, anxiety, PTSD, or condition where the individual is receiving hospice care to qualify for psilocybin treatment. And then Department of Agriculture has a few duties under it. What they'll do is they'll license the facilities that grow it, and also the psilocybin testing laboratories and the psilocybin establishment agents. They'll register all of them. And then they'll also oversee the software design and testing that will be like an inventory control system for those psilocybin products. And it will connect to a patient registration system. And there's no need for registration of psilocybin pharmacies because under the law, the patients may only obtain the product at the medical office of a qualified therapy provider clinic. So it will be illegal for a patient to transport psilocybin on their own. Psilocybin treatment based on evidence is best done in a where the set and setting are in the presence of the therapy provider there in an actual medical clinic. So there's no self-administration and buying it and taking it home. It'll all be administered and possessed only in these medical clinics that are registered by or actually Department of Health and Human Services will register the therapy providers. So we'll be knowing the locations where these clinics are set up. And let's see, so our duties include registering and regulating the qualified medical psilocybin providers, the qualified psilocybin therapy providers, and the psilocybin therapy agents that work at the medical clinic, helping the providers. And we'll also help with some of the software in helping to register the providers, obviously, and the agents, and we'll ensure that it integrates appropriately with the control system that AG is in charge of. We're also required to develop a certification course for psilocybin therapy agents, and we will accept adverse event reports from psilocybin medical providers. We'll also submit an annual report to the Health and Human Services Committee about our operations as we oversee that part of the program. And also, we will take the fee amounts the qualified psilocybin providers are charging, and we'll post them on the state auditor's website and on our own website, like we do for the QMPs and the medical program and the cannabis program. And so patients will be able to see, what some of those amounts are to help keep those amounts in check, I think. So one thing that is happening, of course, is some of you may already know is that there was a Utah Mental Illness Psychotherapy Task Force that was created during the past legislative session. And that task force was busy at work. Dr. Hoffman was a co-chair of that committee, and they had a lot of recommendations relating to psilocybin and the appropriate steps to take as lawmakers consider potential legislation in the future. And there's some recommendations that they followed, but there's other recommendations that the task force made that the legislation SB 200 does not follow. And so, for example, there's only a requirement that the training be at 16 hours, and that's a departure from what the task force was recommending. The recommendation was 80 to 120 hours of training.
Hey, Rich, I want to be mindful of the time.
Oh, yeah.
And that one takes us a little away from the cannabis research topic. Were there other bills that were cannabis related?
No, that's all.
Okay, Mike has a question, and
Sure.
let's take it to the board comment.
Yeah.
Time, if possible.
Great.
My question was just to be about that. UDEF being able to ban a substance on recommendation of a public health authority. Is there a requirement that that substance be known to be harmful or deleterious, like the current language that we were stuck with? Or we could just say, hey, you should ban that because we don't want it.
There is not a requirement that it be poisonous or deleterious. That was intentional. And so as a public health body, you know, DHHS or other public health bodies, they typically make, well, DHHS makes recommendations based on evidence, right? And so as we review evidence and we see that there is something concerning in an ingredient that we know exists in some medical cannabis products, we'll make recommendations based on the evidence. And then Department of Agriculture and Food can choose to take action on that, or they can choose not to. But there will be a public opportunity for individuals that may disagree with that recommendation to share those opposing comments in a rule, an administrative rule process. But you bring up a good point. There's not a requirement that there be evidence that it be poisonous.
I think that was the point, Mike, is that we were tied by that. It's not, it would be unreasonable to have, whimsically state, we don't want this or we don't want that. But, if it didn't conform to some level of adequate evidence of safety or, so I think that's where we hit that wall. So I think that could be an improvement, and it's a recommendation. It just
Right.
allows Department of Health another resource to receive recommendations from. So
No, I'm glad to hear that there's some more wiggle room on that rather than requiring there must be actual evidence of harm, saying we actually would rather have you prove that it's safe, not that it definitely is harmful. So I think it's a good distinction. It would be helpful for a future recommendation we might make.
Yeah, I agree. Any other comments on things we've been talking about today from the board before we go to public comment? Any board member input? Okay, and I forgot, I wanted to just thank you, Brian. You went through that document. I meant to mention that earlier. I don't know if Brian's still with us, but
Yes, sir.
okay. Yeah, I meant to thank you for the work you did on that before we wrapped up. So I really appreciate that. You went through with fine-tooth comb.
Thank you.
Anything else? And then we can go to public comment. Okay, I'm going to hand this part over to you, Sarah.
Okay, so just as a reminder for public comment period, you've got 2 minutes to make your comment. You'll raise your hand and I'll call out to you. When you are called out to, please state your name and if you have an affiliation, and then reference what your question is going to be about, hopefully connected to our agenda. So we'll have 2 minutes, and we'll go from there. So Dr. Viner, you were first, so go ahead.
And I just am going to interrupt your affiliation and also any financial disclosures.
Hi, my name's Dr. Viner. I'm a psychiatrist in Nevada. I have no affiliations. Quick comment, the CBD dose, the problem with the oral dose of CBD is from my understanding, is they still haven't determined how long you can do that and still not harm somebody. So, they didn't do, because it's taken with or without a meal, it wasn't specified fed or non-fed or with or without a meal, because it's raised 5-fold level orally. So the question of the QTC has come up, and they haven't done the studies with oral CBD and QT prolongation. So I think that's kind of a high amount of CBD to give somebody without any safety, concern. I would put a sentence or two about safety about CBD, and that's just one example, because that would be about 1,000 milligrams a week that you're exposing the patient to, and without monitoring. Or I would just have a safety statement, just like they added the mental health safety statement for THC. And then finally, plant viroid infection. Does the certificate of authenticity have the plant viruses listed? Because there's a big outbreak right now from California to Massachusetts with that hops plant viroid type 1. So I was wondering if you guys test for that. Thank you, and I enjoyed the meeting.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Zach King.
Hi, my name is Zach King. I'm a patient advocate with Truce as well as a plumber. I really struggle with my health every day, and I really just wanted to encourage this board to focus on the role of government. Currently, there are synthetics that are in our market that us as patients have to tiptoe around and avoid. That's where the actual harms are. We need to focus on actual access to safe medicine. Currently, patients aren't aware of their COAs. You should be focusing on that versus these similarities. There's really no way that you can fully understand a patient's endocannabinoid system. 26 years of cannabinoid use from a paintball injury and also PTSD, IBS, and so many other issues. We can't just focus on these little easy ideas like a pharmaceutical. This is a very complex plant and very complex systems, whether it's cannabinoids, whether it's mushrooms and psilocybin or psilocin. We need to allow decriminalization of these plants. You should encourage that, as well as safe access for patients so that we could cultivate our own to help us so that we actually know what's going into our plants. And I really hope that we can focus more upon getting rid of these synthetics in our current system right now, because currently patients are suffering and struggling, and we need to get rid of those adulterants. We need to have safe organic medicine and COAs with every single purchase that patients can rely upon, as well as terpenes and flavonoids, and what is exactly how it's grown, whether it's organic or whether they use synthetics. Thanks so much for all that you guys do, but we as patients need so much more. We're not guinea pigs, and we're not piggy banks either. So please, please help us. That's all we ask. Thanks. Love you guys.
Thank you. Nobody else currently has their hand raised. Any other comments from the public?
I'm going to take that as a no, and I'm hoping, Rich, that the department can maybe respond to Dr. Viner's. I think there were some questions in there that maybe should be directed back to you or Department of Ag.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
Dr. Viner had mentioned plant viral infection, and a question about whether that is something that is tested for. And I need to confirm with the Department of Agriculture and Food on that question, and I can report back and let the group know what I find out about that. And then regarding just some of the comments that Zach King had, I think one thing we try to remind patients about is that they have a right to request a copy of the certificate of analysis of any of the products that they purchase, and they can obtain those from the pharmacies, and if they don't get it in the moment, they can follow up and the pharmacy can provide that to the patient. And also the legislation that we discussed earlier, that does enable a public health authority like DHHS to make a recommendation without evidence that that particular cannabinoid is poisonous, but that we just have major concerns based on certain evidence that it should not be included at certain amounts in medical cannabis products as a synthetic cannabinoid. So that SB 91 just does give us that authority to make those recommendations and Ag the ability to execute those restrictions on those type of products that are of concern to Zach. So things are moving forward there as well.
Good, thank you. I just want to say, I appreciate, Zach, what you said. I'm glad it got in the record. Patients are not guinea pigs nor piggy banks. I've heard the first statement, but not the latter, and I think that's a good, I'm glad you got that in the public record. Noted. Thank you for that.
Looks like there's another comment.
Okay, well, I think we can adjourn. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make
I'll
that
make the-
motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
I was thinking maybe you all just wanted to stay for an extra 13 minutes. That's okay. Okay, we don't have to vote on that, do we? I don't, these procedural things are not my strength. Can we just end the meeting, or do we need to have a vote?
You should vote.
Okay, let's vote to, I have no problem with that. I just couldn't remember the rules. All in favor of ending the meeting, say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, thanks everyone for your time. Appreciate it. And we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Aye.
Thanks.
Thanks for your service, everybody.
Aye.